We are now live. Welcome to another edition of the Red Pill Diaries. I'm your host, Rashid. And once again, I bring to you guys from Canada, live from Canada, Professor Salim Mansur. How are you doing today, my brother?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, brother. Shukran, shukran.
Have fun.
You know, and I must greet you. Eid Mubarak, you and your family.
I want to say something to you. The thing, you know, we're watching a slow motion, well, fast paced implosion of the Trump administration and the American empire. Um, Everybody has been warning about not sending troops to try to seize the islands, and just today we have uh, a strike group on the way. We have more things coming up, and now they say that the U.S. is expected to deploy troops from the 82nd Airborne to the Middle East for the Iran war. Um, do you think that this is bordering on lunacy for the president to be ready to risk people's lives like that? Because if they get the islands, if they invade those islands, they're going to be like ducks being shot at random.
Brother, I think a lot of people think that the Epstein virus has completely, you know, driven these people crazy, the neocon, and of course the president, Donald Trump. So this is the virus. I mean, they remember the COVID scam
Hmm.
was a virus that was created in a laboratory
Hmm.
and, and released by the globalists, to basically eliminate the people, you and I, and all the people around the world because it was a global attack. Um, China was accused about it, but we now know that it came out of America, was sent to the Wuhan lab, and so on and so forth. Yeah, and yet there is no prosecution taking place of Anthony Fauci and the whole lot, Ralph Barrick, the NASDAQ, and of course Donald Trump, because he was so proud of the warp speed by which he had created the vaccine he had pushed. So this since then, I mean, we can see the onset of this war against um, people around the world, the globalists, so that they can secure power for themselves. And what is happening in the Middle East, what's happening in West Asia, what you and I and all of us are following, is part of the same, strategy, same evil mind, the globalists, the Zionists, the American imperialists, the British imperialists, the bankers, the Rothschild, the Rockefeller, the whole lot. And they have unleashed this in the desperation that they will possibly lose the grasp that they have been working towards for the last century or more, since World War One or and before, that they will come to completely control the world for themselves and their people. And so yes, I mean, this is the onslaught in West Asia, and I hope we'll get into talking about Israel and its agenda, backed up by Anglo-American power, the question of natural resources, fossil fuel. All of these come together. It is a convergence, and you can see the global South, um, Asia, Africa, Latin America, is what they want to maintain full control over it for extraction and extortion. Extraction of the natural resources, of the fuel, of the wealth. Africa is one of the richest continents in the world, and it is called the dark continent or an impoverished continent. Who impoverished it? You know, over the last 150, 200 years. And same thing with Latin America. I mean, as we are looking at the war in Iran or against Iran, right in your backyard, the attack on Cuba is escalating, I mean, unilateral escalation. So there is no law, there is no morality, there's only what serves them, and the rest of us have to be serf or slaves. That's what it is, brother.
And do you believe that the desperation is becoming is getting to a point where they are trying now? They realize that okay, the dollar hegemony is coming to an end. They realize that their military power is no longer unmatched. They realize that now there is a convergence of multiple nations that seek something outside of Western domination, and this is what's causing them to act irrational. Because you brought up something just a second ago about resource exploitation, and if we look at Venezuela, Venezuela has untapped natural resources. It has the largest oil reserves in the world, proven oil reserves in the world. And here, and when you look at Iran, Iran has huge gas reserves, huge oil reserves. The way they broke up Libya, Libya had huge oil reserves, huge gas reserves. And now we're looking at Palestine being exterminated because of the gas and oil fields found off the coast of Palestine. And Israel is moving to try to take part of Lebanon, because right off Lebanon's coast there was a huge amount of gas and oil discovered. But here's one resource that mostly everybody neglect to talk about. When you look at the threat against Greenland, you look at what took place in is taking place in Venezuela. You're looking at what took place in Libya, and now in Israel moving towards the Litani. All of these nations have huge untapped fresh water reserves. And I remember reading a policy paper by the United States in the think tank saying that water wars would be major in the 21st century. So, do you think that is also playing a part? Because he who controls the water controls agriculture, and if he who controls the agriculture controls policies.
Well, the Quran state all life begins with water.
That's right.
Yeah, and of course, in West Asia, water is for the people more priceless than fossil fuel for Donald Trump and his people. you know, Civilization was built on water. And Iran is one of the oldest living civilization, 4,000 years old. But the Sumerian civilization, that is the beginning of coming of civilization, is along the two rivers that feeds the region, the Euphrates and the Tigris. In Africa, eastern part of it is the River Nile. You know, uh, in China, it's the three great river: the Yellow River, the Huang, Huanghe River, and the Yangtze Kiang River, and so on. In India, it is the Ganges and the Indus. So yes, I mean, water is um, a resource, nature's gift, God's gift to mankind that we need to preserve and protect and not waste it, and of course, Israel wants to control all the water that surrounds itself. The River Jordan, the attack that is taking place right now as we are speaking in Lebanon, that is the Litani River. They
Hmm.
want to secure the water from the Litani River for itself. Yeah, water is the thing. I mean, look at North America. I mean, when you see North America, you and I, we are living as neighbors in the Great Lake areas, which is the largest deposit of fresh water. Lake Superior, Lake Michigan, Huron. But water is desperately needed in New Mexico and California and Arizona, and they are eyeing the water from the Great Lake to be taken away to that part of America, North America. So yes, I mean it is resourceful, right? It is water is a priceless resource. It is a fossil fuel. Without energy, no society can function. At least a modern society can function. So there it is. I mean, again, it was it is God's gift or nature's gift that a large amount of fossil fuel, hydrocarbon fuel, is located in that region of West Asia. But it is also available in the Americas, in the Caribbean, in continental North America, and other parts of the world. But it is the concentration in the Middle Eastern region and the quality of the fossil fuel that is available. This is for the chemical engineers and others to speak about it, not me. But what little we know, what I know, is, for instance, the abundance of hydrocarbon fuel in Venezuela, which has got possibly the largest reserve in the world, estimated. Um, it's, however, an oil that has to be processed out, and that is a very expensive process. It is not a sweet oil in the language of what is called the heavy oil, the heavy crude, as opposed to the Iranian oil that is light oil, sweet oil, and doesn't need much refining. And same thing with the oil from Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates that is in the Persian Gulf region. All of them are tapping into that region. So it varies. Russia again is abundant resource, and the whole war in Ukraine, launched by the Western powers, United States and the European powers, NATO, was to bring about regime change in Moscow and divide up Russia so that the resources of Russia could be then extracted and extorted by the Western powers, the Anglo-American Empire. So yes, I mean this is what we are faced with. But um, there is what is Hegel, the great German philosopher, called the cunning of history, or what we find the statement in the Quran that the people they plan,
But
the evil people they plan, but God is the best of planners.
yes, sir.
You know, and
Exactly.
so things things doesn't go according to the plan of evil-minded people. And that's what is happening in Iran. You know,
Mm.
that's what happened in South Africa. You remember? I mean, people have forgotten about that, but I belong to that generation, that lived through that period and watched and observed. And what a great price South Africa paid for the ultimate liberation for majority rule. And South Africa is blessed with abundant of resources. For instance, um, the diamond mines of South Africa was not controlled by the South Africans; it was controlled by the people again who were trying to destroy West Asia, that is the Jews and the Zionists.
Mhm.
So yes, it is about resources ultimately, but what it goes on to show at the deepest level that the imperialists, the colonial imperialists, they not only want to control, they want to deprive the rest who are actual owners of those resources, deprive them of it so that it is they can maintain their lifestyle at the
Yeah.
expense of vast majority of the people.
Yes.
That has been what imperialism was all about, colonialism was all about. That is the history which many others have talked about, and particularly from the global south. I have talked about it and written about it, that the Eurocentric age in America, that is United States and Canada, is an extension of Europe, in that sense.
Hmm.
The Eurocentric age began with the age of discovery, that is Columbus arriving in America, in Hispaniola, Haiti and Cuba. That's where he arrived, thinking he had arrived in India, because that was the journey that they were trying to make, go around to India and that part of the world. Because with the Islamic empire or civilization in the middle, they could not go through the land. I mean, Marco Polo had gone through the land all the way to China, and others had gone to India. But now that that travel route was blocked by the Ottoman Empire, the Ottoman Caliphate, with the rise of the Muslim world. So they had to find another way to travel. And so that's the age of discovery, going by sea, by ocean. And they land in America, actually, the North American continent. And so it begins the Eurocentric age. And brother, what was it? It was the raping, the destruction, the massacre of the original people or the indigenous people in North America. I mean, if you read the history of that period, uh, yeah, I have this book sitting on my table. This is by Bartolome de las Casas, who was a Spanish priest who came 15 years after Columbus to the Caribbean. And then he came as a priest. He wanted to bring the word of Jesus over here uh, with the Spanish fleet. However, he was there to observe and watch what happened. I hesitate to call people by their skin color. This again is a gift of God. It's not me. It's a gift that I am brown and you are brown and there are whites and there are yellows and so on and so forth. People, that is the racial, um, you know, diversity, ethnic diversity, like in a garden, the diversity of nature. So, but there, yeah, we have sometimes have to speak about it. The white man who arrived from Europe, they engage as Las Casas documents in this book. It is a short account of the destruction of Indies. And this book was prepared by him. This is, early 1500, to present the report of what he was witnessing to the Spanish king, the Catholic king. And it was, the word genocide did not exist at that time, but it was a complete rape and pillage. The Columbus, Hernando Cortez, Pizarro, they arrived and they wiped out civilization, Aztec civilization, Mayan civilization, Peruvian civilization. They wiped them out. And then they brought, you know, slaves from Africa to to the Americas, to what is South America, Brazil, all of the area, Argentina, Mexico, etc. And then, of course, North America, the United States. So the slaves coming in from Africa, from West Africa, many of them were, by the way, Muslim. But the Muslim also engaged in slave trading. That is, the tribal issue that went on. But many of the ships that brought them were financed by the Jews, and so on. And the slave trade went on from about early 1500s, and you talked to me about it, in the United States. It was in 1555, but it began soon after Columbus arrived, and all of these people arrived. So this thing carries on. I mean, it began in the Americas, went on in Africa, went on in Asia, and so on. I mean, Ferdinand Magellan sailed across the Pacific to Philippines, and wiped out whatever was Filipino culture and implanted over there the Spanish culture and made Filipino Catholic empire. The very name Philippine was given because at that time the Spanish king emperor was King Philip, the Catholic. So it was in his name because he had financed it. The British, they had during the during the period of Queen Elizabeth I, these ships going towards North America with names of the sailors or the captain of the ship, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, uh, James Cook. These guys were pirates because they were coming in, they were attacking other European ships that were trading and going back with the wealth of North America, South America, particularly the Spanish and the Portuguese, and people like Francis Drake were pirates. They attacked, they stole, they plundered, and the Queen knighted them. They became Sir Francis Drake, Sir Walter Raleigh, Sir James Cook, and so on and so forth. So this continued 500 years. So 1992, the year the Soviet Union collapsed, was also the 500th anniversary of Columbus arriving in North America or in the Caribbean. 500 years was the Eurocentric age. And then that was almost the end of the 20th century, last century. And then was the coming together of what were former colonies in Africa, in South America, and of course in Asia, coming together, awakening. I mean, the victory of South Africa, you might say, the release of Mandela, the taking of control by the black majority population or colored people population, the African National Congress, you might say was the beginning of this shift in Africa. It was the beginning of a new age that is a multipolar age, no longer the Eurocentric age. It was the dominance of Europe, the white man, over the rest of the world. What they say will have to be the law for the rest of the world. Or there will be two stages of law, one for them and one for the rest of us.
Mhm.
That was the beginning. So from 1992 to where we are, 2026, 34 years has been the interim. It's like a transition thing.
Mhm.
And you can see between 1992 and 2026 how many attacks and war was launched by the Anglo-American power. You know, we can just count them in our finger. Um, the attack on Somalia, the attack on Sudan, the attack on Libya, the attack on Serbia, the attack on Palestinians that is going on from the time of World War One, the attack on Afghanistan, on the basis of 9/11. And now we know that the 9/11 was an internal affair. It was a staged false flag operation to blame the Arabs and the Muslims that they carried it out. But in fact, we now know, just like COVID, 9/11 was an inside job and a false flag and pin the blame upon um, the Arabs. This in this case, those pilots. Just imagine these guys who did not know possibly how to fly a glide plane were going to hijack big bodied Boeing 777 and 747 and what have you, and fly it in a manner that it becomes believable that they can chart the route and go and strike at the two twin towers. So this attacks, these wars, these pressures to keep the empire going, you and I and people of our compatriots of our age and younger, we are sitting and watching and witnessing. You know, We are recording the history. In one way, we are fortunate that God has given us the life to see the truth of, an age coming to an end and a new possibility for mankind waiting to go forward. That is the multipolar age. So, you see through it. Uh, Second World War was the beginning of the end of the European age, the beginning of the end of colonial empire. China was liberated, you know, under Mao Zedong. Yeah, they were communists, but the main thing was that the Chinese were fighting for their independence to be themselves. China was liberated, the biggest, largest country in the world. India became independent, and so on and so forth. Indonesia, all of these countries had to fight and struggle to become independent, and then to start, in a way, to acquire their own technology, their own understanding, their education, so they can be masters of their own destiny. So, from the end of Second World War to where we have come, 1992 to where we have come, was the effort that was invested by all these countries that had been colonized and extorted and extracted, uh, to regain their dignity, to regain their capacity to define their own destiny, to choose their own way. And for many of the country, and Iran is a perfect example, China is another example. Uh, these are not simply countries, these were civilization, ancient civilization, you know, that fell behind the Eurocentric powers in the 16th, 15th, 16th century. And then for the next 500 years, they were dominated, and they were robbed, and they were persecuted, and so on and so forth. Um, but everything must come to an end. And what we are observing is the struggle of the people to regain their dignity. And that's what's happening in Iran, you know, struggle of the Iranians to be able to say, this is our civilization. And we do not want the ways that you people live and the way you conduct your affairs. We want to conduct the affairs which is our way. And we are not interfering with you. You go on and carry on your way. But we have our way. And what is the answer? No, you don't have your way. We will take your stuff. It is
Mhm.
our stuff. And in a nutshell, that is what is happening.
And they try to dictate. These are relatively new civilizations into the hundreds of years, uh, and they're trying to dictate civilizational states how they should act, how they should govern, how they should live. If you're not a democracy of what they call a democracy, then you must be overthrown. And sometimes they let the cat out of the bag, like Lindsey Graham, the senator out of the Carolinas, when he said, "We took Venezuela and we have her oil. Now, if we take Iran's oil, we'll sit on top of 33% of the world's oil and gas," which means that what they're doing, they're reaching and they're trying their best to try to maintain some kind of backing to a dying petrol dollar, and they need something to give the empire a little bit more life, because remember, the United States is not producing much. The only thing she produces is weapons and movies and dollars, and people are getting tired of the dollars. The movies are repetitive, and as we can see on the battlefield, the weapons are becoming more ineffective. So I think that this is causing a vacuum in thinking in the leadership, because they've always dominated. They've always been able to make people submit to their agenda. And now that other poles are rising, it is enraging them because they're saying in their psyche, how dare you challenge me? How dare you buck up against what I say? I said we're all equal, but we're all equal underneath me. What do you think that is some of the psyche that they have when they're dealing with people? Because it's never as Russia said, America doesn't speak diplomacy; she speaks demands and dictates.
Absolutely. But you see, 500 years, that is half a millennium, 500 years of habit cannot be wiped out overnight, you know. So they took it for granted. I mean, this is a generational thing. So in 500 years, 50 generation possibly gone by, where they have dominated with guns, with firepower, the rest of the world. You know, I mean, um, when Columbus arrived, and as I said, that's the beginning of the Eurocentric age. Um, there are two aspects at the minimum. One is the aspect of extortion and extraction and domination over the non-whites in Africa, Asia, what became Latin America, South America, that is the indigenous population. That's one aspect. But there's another aspect to it, brother, and we should not overlook it and forget about it. It is the weakness of the older civilizations, you know. So whether it is the Chinese civilization, the Indian civilization, the Arab Islamic civilization, Iranian civilization, they had gone weak. They were therefore open to exploitation. One of my favorite, um, professor, scholar, Nobel Prize winner from India, Pakistan. I've written about him, Professor Abdus Salam. He was a physicist. He pointed out, and I have shared this with many people, that is my students, in my lectures and through my writings, what Professor Salam said. And this is what it is. In a nutshell, I won't go into large detail, but this is what he said in one of his lectures, later published in a book. He said that by 1660, there was a catching up of Europe with the rest of the world in terms of civilization, in terms of knowledge, in terms of technology. Why 1660? Because he chooses that date, 1660, to make the following observation. He says, in 1660, there were two monuments constructed, built. One was the Taj Mahal in India. You must have seen the pictures of Taj Mahal, brother. And the other was St. Paul's Cathedral in London, England. And he says, these two monuments that were built and completed in 1660s were the finest expression of two civilizations that had arrived at an equal state. India was an older civilization, and England, Europe, was the new emerging civilization, beginning with after the Dark Ages and the wars of religion, and so on. Europe was emerging through Renaissance, and then what it is called the age of discovery and the age of scientific revolution and philosophy. And in this awakening, by 1660, Europe, England representing Europe, had reached a stage of civilization that was represented by India, or China. But he gave the example of India, the Taj Mahal. Taj Mahal was called one of the wonders of the world in terms of architecture, and architecture is a science, requires knowledge of so many different disciplines. It's not simply building something. You have to know, you know, the science of chemistry to some extent, the science of geology, the science of metal, and put all of that together to build such magnificent monuments. You know, of course, the ancient Egyptian or whoever they were building pyramids. You know, and they built pyramids. They are the wonders of the world. In South America, you know, you go to Mexico, you go to Peru, you see the remnants of those civilizations, you know, pyramids, buildings, temples. So, so architecture, or you go to Europe and you see the cathedrals, you know, so they are wonders of that time period we're talking about, you know, in the early period after Jesus, that is uh, AD, Anno Domini, you know, going forward. So we are now at an equal stage in 1660. But then Professor Salam says a third monument was built within a generation, and that monument was Isaac Newton's publication of Principia. Isaac Newton was one of the most amazing individuals, and his Principia changed the dynamics of modern science with mathematics and astronomy and so on and so forth. And Professor Salam says, with that one monument, Europe took a leap ahead of all the other civilizations. And if you look back and you can see, after Newton comes the scientific age in Europe, you know, whether it's a steam engine, there to other mechanisms for getting energy, and the whole rapid development that take place, gunpowders, you know, cannons, fighting in instruments. So where the previous age, the armies met on the battlefield and fought each other, you know, man to man. Now it was completely different, and it was going to be different, and that's exactly led to the dominance of the European over the other civilization. Okay, so that that is the story behind the rise and the dominance of Europe, Eurocentric age. That's America, and America joined up with Europe, or an extension of Europe. Well, 500 years later, as they self-destructed, the two world wars of the 20th century, what were they? It was committing harakiri. No Indian went to create a world war in Europe. No Chinese went to create it. No Africans went to create it. It was them themselves. You know, they fought among themselves. This is a cunning of history. So Allah says, you are planning. You're planning to take over and keep the world to yourself. Well, see what will happen. After all, He's the best planner, and you saw the beginning of the crumbling of Europe began. Within 20 years, there was a Second World War, which was even worse than the First World War. And the modern technology and all, and they self destructed. They self destructed to the extent that they could no longer control and dominate their empires, their colonial empires. Okay, so they had to retreat, and they began the retreat. In China, Mao Zedong won. In India, Gandhi won. In Egypt, Nasser won. In Ghana, Nkrumah won, and so on and so forth. Right? And winning Ming was the first stage, becoming independent. But that was the beginning. They had to catch up, and then they had to find a way to go beyond catching up. That is, to build their own basis of regaining their civilizational identity, and then, asserting themselves. So that's what began, I would say, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, that is the end of Marxist ideology, communist ideology, and the liberation of South Africa. This coincidence is not accidental when you're looking back in time. These things just didn't happen because a lot of struggle went in. Nelson Mandela was put into solitary confinement for 27 years, before he walked out of the jail because they could no longer keep him. Because young men were not going to be anymore, you know, the slaves and the serfs of the Europeans. This was their land, and they were going to take it back, and they're going to make their lives once more a life to be proud of. That's what Malcolm X talked about. You know, that's what Martin Luther King talked about. You know, in the context of American politics. So then, 1992, if it is a benchmark, the 500th year end of the Eurocentric age, when a man dies or an animal dies, um, there is rigor mortis. Huh? So people still might think that the dead body is still alive. Hands are moving, bones are moving, gasping. Empires, they don't die overnight. They go into rigor mortis. What we are witnessing is the rigor mortis of the empires from 1992 to now. They've lost their mind. Instead of recognizing the reality, the facts, take the case of Israel and take the case of Iran. We circle back to Israel and Iran, or Israel and the Palestinian. Here is a country that was built on a stolen land by people claiming they have a 3,000-year-old claim that Abraham gave this land to them. But they have no connection with Palestine. They are Europeans,
Mm-hmm.
right? The modern DNA shows that they have no connection with the land. Netanyahu is from Poland and his name is Milikowski. And he
Mm-hmm.
has to change his name to
Mm-hmm.
sound somehow, a man from that part of the world. So here it is. Again, the Anglo American power creates a country or helps these people, the East European Jews, to come to this part of the world and gives the land to them. You know, Today, the population of Israel is around about 9 million. The population of Iran is 10 times the population of Israel. Israel is 1/80th in size of Iran. Iran's geography is 80 times larger than Israel. But look at the attitude of the Zionists, that they are going to build another empire, the greater Israel, from the Nile to the Euphrates. And because Iran is on the way that might stop them or impede them or be an obstacle to them, they're going to take it out. But they can't take it out by themselves, so they get the Americans to join them to take them out. You know, this this is nothing but madness. They cannot do that. They cannot override a population that is 10 times larger than your population. You cannot override a country that is 80 times bigger than yours. You cannot override a country with the resources that God has gifted to that land, nature has gifted to the land, with yours having none of that. So, where did this idea come from? I would say this comes from a madness of a civilization that is dead. 3,000 years ago, it was dead, you know, now, and it's still going through rigor mortis. We have to face the effect of that. That is, we mean the people of the global south, the third world,
Mm-hmm.
but no longer people of the global south are going to keep quiet, and that's what is happening. The Iranian civilization, 4,000 years old, has a very rich history of art and science and music and literature and language, and of course, religion. That's philosophy. Before Islam, Iran was Zoroastrian. Lord Zoroaster was a prophet. The, Allah says in the Quran, He has sent messengers to every people. So there it was. And Lord Zoroaster, or Zoroaster, he brought the message of one God, worshipping of one God, Ahura. So this idea, and when the Jews and the Christian Zionists, which is Donald Trump and the whole lot of them, Peter Hegseth, Marco Rubio, everybody, the Christian Zionists, they say, or Ted Cruz says, you bless Israel. If you bless Israel, God will bless you. If you curse Israel, God will curse you, and the story of Abraham. They forget, or they erase their own book. In this case, the Genesis. They're talking about Abraham and his communication with God, where God promises him that he will be the father of nations.
Mm-hmm.
You know, well, in Genesis, the chapters 16 to 21, if anybody goes and reads chapter 16 to 21 in Genesis, the first book in the Old Testament, it is the story of Hajar, Abraham and Hajar. Hajar is the woman that Abraham took because his wife Sarah could not have a child. And so Hajar was given to Abraham through the medium of Sarah. And Hajar conceived Ishmael, which we talk in Arabic, Ismail. So the oldest son of Abraham is Ishmael, right? And it is Ishmael's line that goes to Prophet Muhammad. The story of Abraham and Ishmael together laying the foundation of the mosque in Mecca, which is the Kaaba, right? But that has been written off by these people. They don't want to acknowledge that Abraham the first son was Ishmael. He was 13 or 14 years older than his second son through Sarah, um, Isaac. Now, the Quran doesn't get into any of these polemical discussion. It just points that out. So, what is the story of the sacrifice? Is it Ishmael or is it Isaac? Well, they insist it is Isaac. But if it is Isaac came 13, 14 years after Ishmael. It is Ishmael who was the child that Abraham took with him for the sacrifice that was demanded of him, and God was testing him to what extent he is obedient to God, who called him to worship him, to make a covenant with him. Anyhow, the fact of the matter is that if God gave the land through Abraham to his family, the family includes Ishmael. The Palestinians are the descendants of Ishmael, whether they're Christian Palestinian or Muslim Palestinian. So there is no logical discussion according to their own book of religion. They distort it to serve their own purpose.
And a lot of them don't know it. They're ignorant of it because they've been taught a certain perception of the book, and they don't want any other. When you've become accustomed to something, and someone tries to tell you something to correct you, sometimes you feel that they're attacking you because you lack the knowledge to understand that people are trying to inform you on missing components of what you think you know. And also, back to something that you were saying about rigor mortis. I often say this about the empire. I say it all the time on the show, that I liken the American empire and the Western world like a snake. And the snake head is cut off. Even though the head of the snake is cut off, if you don't bury the head, it still has venom in the fangs. But even when you bury the head, the body still contorts for hours after the head is removed, and until rigor mortis sets in. And we're at the point in empire and Western domination where rigor mortis is starting to set in, and I think it's making desperation even that more prevalent for the people to see, because the policies that they're enacting does not make sense to any rational or sound thinker.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. That's what it is, and you can see, rigor mortis is also signs of desperation, sign of madness, insanity, loss of perspective, and what we are witnessing since October of 2023 um, is precisely that. The Palestinian people broke out of their concentration camp on October 7th, 2023. Occupation is and was, in this particular sense, people put away in a concentration camp, locked in. So finally, they broke out. And the response was what? A genocide, a complete, disproportionate, and indiscriminate attack on children, women, and men. You know, and the world was appalled, but not the Europeans, not the Americans. You know, at the United Nations, there we see it was one law for one class of people and another law for the rest of the people. Um, we talked about genocide. That is, the world talked about it. Americans talked about it. It was President Clinton who was the president when the Rwanda genocide took place, and the discussions in the United Nations, the mass massacre of people in the Balkans, in Bosnia, in Croatia, in Herzegovina, etc. We all saw all of these things happening, and the United Nations was taking steps. But when the Gaza genocide happened, no, all the resolutions that was put forward were either vetoed or ignored. And we are still waiting for the results from the International Court of Justice. Um, the ICC, the International Criminal Court, when they indicted Netanyahu and his defense minister Yoav Gallant for war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide, the Americans attacked the ICC, attacked the prosecutor, Karim Khan, attacked the judges of the International Criminal Court, sanctioned them. So you talk about the rule of law, but there is no respect for the rule of law, none whatsoever. Um, I've been talking to my friends about recently with the war in Iran, and what happened with in Venezuela. At the beginning of this year, in January, a new year began with the kidnapping of a leader of a sovereign state by America. Uh, and I was pointing out to them um, that at Nuremberg trial, the opening statement in the Nuremberg trial was given by the American prosecutor general, chief prosecutor, Robert Jackson. Robert Jackson was a justice of the Supreme Court who was then requested by President Truman, to take the position of the chief prosecutor for Nuremberg trials, and he did. And so he went to Nuremberg as the prosecutor on leave from the Supreme Court. And without going into too much of a detail, in his opening statement, which took almost a whole day to present, with all the coffee breaks and lunch breaks and so on through the day, it is a document that should be read by people once again. So it was 80 years ago, almost 1945, November of 1945. And in that statement, the core argument, the central thesis of the prosecution was the making of war of aggression by Germany and Imperial Japan that had no legal basis at that time. In terms of legal basis, was the League of Nations, uh,
Mm-hmm.
therefore the international law. And as Robert Jackson then explained, the war of aggression was, this is not his word, I'm just putting my words in it, war of aggression is the mother of all crimes, because with the war of aggression, everything else follows. War crimes, crimes against humanity, crimes against international humanitarian laws, and ultimately genocide. You know, Second World War, I mean, genocide. The Israelis and the Americans and the Anglo-American Empire and the Jews, they only now talk about the Holocaust. The Second World War was only about the Holocaust, 6 million. Well, there were 65 to 70 million people who died in the Second World War. There was almost 30 million Russians who died in the Second World War. There were Gypsies and Hungarians and Romanians and Serbians and so on and so forth that died. Again, it was a European affair, but the Second World War has been reduced to simply the Holocaust, uh, and people don't remember the rest. They don't want to remember the rest. But the point is, war of aggression is the principle, as the American prosecutor at Nuremberg laid down the precedent and the argument, which went into the making of what it is now in the United Nations Charter, that everything else then follows from the war of aggression. Well, this is exactly what is happening. It's a war of aggression against Iran. It is genocide against the Palestinians. You know, they didn't do anything. It is what has been done to them. Iran has taken upon itself a legal, on the legal basis, a defensive war, and there can only be two types of defensive war that is legal, according to international law, according to the UN Charter. One is a war that comes about as a result of a UN Security Council resolution based on Chapter 7. So that is the authority of the UN through the Security Council that then leads to a conflict to enforce the UN resolution.
Mm.
And the second basis of lawful war is Article 51, that is the war in defense of one sovereignty, the people defending their country from aggression. And that's exactly what Iran is doing. It is defending itself from aggression that was launched against Iran when the Iranians were engaged through the representative in negotiating. They were engaged in diplomacy. In the summer of 2025, the June war, the 12-day war, Iran had come back from Oman, the foreign minister and the delegates from Muscat, Oman for the weekend. They broke on Friday, and the negotiation was to resume on Monday. And Israel did the strike on Saturday. The same thing happened this time on February 28th. The Iranian delegation were in Oman, Muscat, and um, the American delegate, that is Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, they returned to Washington to go back again on Monday. At least that's what was the announcement, that they're coming back on Monday to Muscat to pick up the negotiation, and that Marco Rubio would be going to Israel, to Jerusalem on Monday. Monday would have been March the 1st. Well, on Saturday, February the 28th, Iran, Israel will launch its decapitation strike against Iran. You know, that took off, that, that, that assassinated the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, along with many of his other officials. Okay, so in the midst of diplomatic negotiation, into which the Iranian diplomat, representative of the republic, had faithfully gone to sit down and negotiate with the Americans, Israel launches the attack. That means with the full uh, understanding of the Americans, that is Trump and his administration. And here we are, as you and I are speaking, we are now into the fourth week of this war that was launched by Anglo-American Zionists against Iran, without any provocation or without any excuse that Iran had done something that was unlawful.
Mm. I was thinking about something earlier about this victimhood of the West and how they never acknowledge the crimes that they commit. And whenever you bring the crimes up, they never accept responsibility. It's always an out for them, and they never really uh, show any contrition or any sympathy for those victims of theirs. Like, just to give you an example of what I'm saying, and it's in the Bible also. So for those of you who are Bible thumpers, I'll tell you about this. Okay, now according to history, I'm not talking about religion. I'm talking about history, and we have this documented. Uh, Black people were forced here. Some people well, they were sold by some of their own people, but you're not getting it. Listen, this is what took place. They were brought here in chains. They were promised to get gold for their labor. Once they got on the first ones got on the ship, and the ship sailed out to sea. John Hawkins or John Hopkins, they named universities and colleges after him, and his bandits came from beneath the ship with guns and forced all of them in chains. Now they brought them here. This is a historical lesson, and I ask everybody to go back and look at this. They brought them here on April Fool's Day as to make mock of them. April 1st, 1555. In your Bible, it talks about this. It says that know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a strange land among strange people who would ill entreat them for the duration of 400 years. There is no people on the planet Earth that has a documented history of being enslaved in a foreign land for 400 years outside of Black America. And the reason I'm putting this to you, and I'm openly stating this to you, is that Babylon could have been healed, but she was not healed because she did not show contrition and she did not do right by those whom she wronged. When you go to court, and hold on one second. Okay, here we are. Um, if you commit a wrong and you go to court and simply apologize, the court or the judge or the magistrate does what? force you to pay compensation or um, do something that will show that you are truly sorry for what you've done. That has never happened in 400 years of the most miserable treatment ever. Remember that these people, babies were killed, stomped on, smashed. When the first slaves arrived to the shores, they cut open the women's belly, and they let the pregnant baby, the woman that's pregnant, her baby drop to the floor, and they smashed the baby to instill fear. They shot or stabbed most of the men, and the other men, this is what they call buck breaking. They would take them and lay them down in chains, and they would rape the man. The slave master would rape the men in front of the women to put fear in them. So now, if one were to think about this, listen, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a strange land among strange people who will ill entreat them for 400 years. This could not possibly be Benjamin Netanyahu. This could not possibly be them because it doesn't add up. History says that the what they deemed as African Americans here have been enslaved for over 400 years. You have to show contrition. They have not shown contrition or sympathy to to go a little further. What I'm saying to bring my point home, they allocate hundreds of thousands of acres of land a year for endangered species uh, to repopulate them. They have yet to give 140 acres and a mule in exchange for what they promised. Right? Think about that. If you don't do right, right won't come to you. This is the law of Allah. This is the law of God. To get right, you have to do right, think right, and act right. And when you wrong somebody, you have to make amends to that wrong. And this is one thing that it says. So some people say, "Well, I'm not. I did not have any part in that." Yeah, but the system, you are a beneficiary of the system that was built upon that. And the Bible also says, "For the sins of the fathers, I will visit it upon the children." Do you understand? So you got to do right and think right. So if we're talking about this, America is only becoming more arrogant, more robust in her hubris, even in the day of her downfall. She is robbing and raping, pillaging and warring against societies everywhere. She tells India, "We'll never let you rise as high as we made the mistake with China." She goes in and flood Nigeria with terrorists, and then she says, "Hey, Nigeria, if you don't let us put our troops in there to fight the very terrorists that we put in there, then we're going to bomb you and sanction you, and we're going to pound you." Nigeria capitulated. The same with Venezuela. Look at Delcy Rodriguez and how she has capitulated to the whims of Trump. And now she is trying to do that with Iran, but Iran has been preparing for decades for this moment here, after it was added to a so-called axis of evil for standing up for the Palestinians and for standing against imperial hubris and imperial policy. So, Professor, they say when a person is falling or a person is heading downward, sometimes they're blinded by their hubris and their arrogance, that they can't see that the fall will be great. Do you think that this is what is happening to the American and the Western leadership on their downfall, because they have been blinded by arrogance, because they are drunk on or inebriated on what they used to be former imperial hubris?
Yes, yes, absolutely. It is in the context, as you said, dying or declining, or the reversal that takes place in the life of a man, in an individual, or in the life of a country, or in the life of a civilization. It is as the process of decay, degradation, decline begins and the momentum gathers speed, the exposure of what that individual, that country, that race that civilization represented at its height get fully exposed. That's also part of the cunning of history or Allah's word, that I am the best planner. You know, I mean, at the height, whether the story of Moses and the Pharaoh is history in a sense of facts, or it is history in terms of mythology, just like Homer's Iliad or
Hmm.
Odyssey, because, these were stories that were told by one generation to another generation. And in these stories were the messages of a people's character, a people's destiny, and who they are, where they came from. It could be imagined or it could be real. But that is, you see, we are storytellers. So the Quran also tells the stories. So there you see in the story about Moses and the Pharaoh, at the height of their power, that is the Pharaoh, what happens? He chases Moses. He's going to bring back Moses and his people and punish them. He drowns. The allegory of the sea opening up, and the Pharaoh is trapped. Okay, he's exposed. Uh, I would say, some of the best understanding about what you have just now said comes in great literature. Great literature have a lot to tell us about life and human existence. So, for instance, the plays of Shakespeare, or going back even further back, Greek tragedies. Uh, these are stories which captures, in many sense, the essence of an individual life or the life of a culture, the life of a civilization. So take the story of Macbeth. The story of Macbeth, a very powerful general, one of the favorite generals of the King of Scotland, Duncan, and he has this encounter with the witches, and the witches tell him that he is going to become, the Thane of Porter, one of the highest ranking aristocrat. He will become, the King of Scotland, and no man born of a woman will ever endanger him. So the voices of the witches is the mechanism by which, the mind of Macbeth is moving in his ambition. And so he kills the king. He be- who comes to visit him. He himself becomes the king. His wife is full of, you know, ambition, and the man is completely confident that no man born of woman will ever challenge him. And then what happens? Toward the end of the drama, the world moves against him, and he is gone totally crazy. He starts yelling and screaming. His last line captures in so many ways, I think, the situation of Donald Trump right now. His most famous speech, as he is cornered by the opposing forces, it goes like this: tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. He's crying now, creeps in this petty pace from day to day to the last syllable of recorded time. Then he's saying, and all our yesterdays seem like lighted fools, the way to dusty death. Then he
Hmm.
cries out, out, brief candle. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more, and he dies. It is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury, signifying nothing. And that's what it is happening. You can see it right in front of us. Great plays, brings out the condition of a human being, of a culture, of a civilization, right up in the front. It is enacted. Macbeth goes down. The other great play, I mean, there's so many one of them, but I must share this one with you because you talked about being blind. One of the greatest play from ancient Greece is that of Oedipus. You possibly know that, brother. Oedipus Rex by Sophocles.
Yes.
What is, what is the story about? It is about Oedipus, who is now the king of Thebes, and there is a plague going on, like the COVID, a plague going on that is destroying his kingdom, and he has no remedy. His people has no remedy to deal with the plague, and so he puts out a challenge. He said, "I want to know if anybody can find an answer to this." And the ancient oracle, the Delphic oracle, prophesies that um, the plague is a result of a prophecy that was made, and you have to find out who is the man who has committed parricide, that means killed his parents, and incest, who has made sexual relationship with the other parent, within the family, and that's the person who has to take responsibility for the plague. And so a messenger comes to the king, and he tells him that this is the prophecy. And in the examination of that prophecy, the story comes out. Oedipus was a child that was cast away by his parents, King Laius of Thebes and Queen Jocasta, his wife, because Oedipus was born with a defective foot, and he was cast away. In those days, a defective child would be cast away. But he was saved. Oedipus was saved by a shepherd and raised. And when he became adult, on one day, he had an encounter with the king, King Laius. There was a fight, and Oedipus killed King Laius. And then he married the queen, Queen Jocasta. In both cases, he did not know that King Laius was his biological father, so he had committed parricide. And that Queen Jocasta, who he married, was his biological mother. So the prophecy was fulfilled. He he had killed his father and married his mother. Two great sins. And the result of that two great sins was the plague of in Thebes that was destroying his kingdom. So what does Oedipus do when he hears that? When he just pointed out to him that the source of the plague is you, your majesty. You did this. You committed this crime. So he tears his face. He blinds himself. And then he walks away from the kingdom. And then the plague goes away. You see, he takes responsibility and he walks away, but he blinds himself. Again, the metaphor, the allegory of the story is, you see, hubris or arrogance, and then the end result of that arrogance, the downward coming down. So yes, absolutely, absolutely. What is happening, as I said, rigor mortis of the civilization we are watching, is the sheer madness that has taken over. I mean, the Epstein virus. They're desperately trying to hide it and to deflect the crimes that have been done. Pedophilia, underage girl being sexually trafficked for blackmail, and the horror of horror, cannibalism with young infants and children. Now, these are such atrocious moral crimes, but these are not being done by common people, average people, not by the truck drivers, not by the bartenders, not by the grocery owners. It's been done by the billionaire class, right? And it is being done in this Western civilization. Now, none of these can go unpunished. We might not, the common people cannot do anything, you know. I mean, the billionaire class, the cabal, they're hiding it. Instead of subpoenaing, doing the subpoena and bringing these people into court and indicting them, none of that is happening. Not one person has been indicted, you know. However, the crimes that has happened will be punished in God's own time and in God's own way. The murder, the abuse of children, particularly children, will not go unpunished. And so the children of Gaza, you know, according to the official report, is 70,000. But this, you know, the medical sources and others have pointed out it is in excess, in excess of 250,000. You know, there are calculations. There's over 500,000, and the majority of them were children and women. These crimes will have to be answered, and will be answered ultimately, as it is said, the arc of justice comes down. It takes its own time, but it comes down. And you can see now, you can see what has happened in Israel. With Iran is the instrument of that punishment that is coming down. And same thing in America. America has lost all respect around the world. America is now totally seen as a corrupt pariah state under Donald Trump, or as it was under Biden. There's no respect anymore. And America was at one time highly respected, maybe wrongly respected, but still highly respected around the world. You know, at the time of John F. Kennedy, I was a child when John F. Kennedy was killed. But the name of John Kennedy was one that was admired and respected around the world. But after John F. Kennedy, it seemed the American president and the American civilization has, as you pointed out, gone down, and this is where we have come. Donald Trump, a complete maniac, and America's exposed. Unless the American people take into their hand and demand justice, as the children of South Africa, for instance, demand justice, injustice will continue. Because it is not simply Donald Trump, it is the entire 535 members of the Congress, you know, senators and congressmen. We can only name one or two people who have some courage and some sense of morality. Thomas Massey, Marjorie Taylor Greene, O'Connor, 3 or 4 people. Senator Rand Paul. That's about it. You know.
Yes.
Where are the Supreme Court justices? They're silent. Nobody's standing up and, you know, saying, you know, this is unacceptable. The whole media, the universities, the academia. So the corruption is as deep, it seems to me, as in the Bible or in the Quran. It is mentioned Sodom and Gomorrah.
Mm-hmm.
What did God do? What did Allah do? He wiped them out. Before Sodom and Gomorrah, there's the story of Noah, the floods. That was before Abraham, according to the Bible, according to the Quran. The corruption had become so deep and so widespread that with the flood, God wiped out the entire civilization. and gave man a new chance to come out and and do what is right. So
Yeah.
the exposure is now complete. There is nothing hidden. And again, that is the cunning of history. One of the things that has happened, brother, and it's a very important thing, as the older civilization, after having gone through 500 years of dominance under the Eurocentric age, turned around to come back. First, they got their independence, then started building up. The thing, the cunning of history is the technology that was developed in the Eurocentric age was now democratized. And so North Korea can have the atom bomb, the nuclear weapons, the
Hmm.
ballistic missile, you know. Pakistan can have it. The Iranians chose not to have it. That was their principle. Okay, again, based upon their view and understanding of Islam as Shia Muslims. You know, the democratization of technology and science mean a black kid in Africa who was and were being denied the opportunity to perform at the height of their own potentiality, to be a Einstein of Africa, to be a Michelangelo of Africa, to be, you know, a Lincoln of Africa. Well, now they can. This is them improving it. You know, Mo- technology is not the monopoly of only the Rothschild and the Rockefellers. Technology is now the Iranians approving it. So this democratization is also the coming of history. And in the face of this democratization of knowledge, of science, of technology, you cannot have a unipolar hegemon going on and on and on, telling the rest of the world how to live their lives. It has to be a multipolar world that is a diversity of civilization in which we talk to each other, we respect each other's, you know, personality, achievement, dignity. When Jesse Owen came back from Berlin Olympics with, I think it was 4 medals, he was
Five.
ignored in America. 5 medals. He was ignored in America. Franklin Roosevelt didn't invite him to the White House. The segregation was there. James Crow law was there. So there's the story of Jesse Owen was kept alive by the people among whom he was born. But now it is all around.
Hmm.
I see this story, you know, um, what is happening in this war which America and Israel launched against Iran. Uh, that Iran alone, a non-nuclear country, a country from the global south, is standing against the two nuclear powers, you know, and and not kneeling down or bowing down. It is being pummeled. It is being pummeled by standing up. And you know what the story tells reminds me of? Muhammad Ali and Ropa. There he was. I remember that fight, in 1975, the rumble in jungle in Zaire. I watched it at night, the time
Yeah.
difference. And there he was. He was in his mid 30s. And George Foreman was in his mid 20s. The age difference. And everybody said that in George Foreman will knock him out in the first 2 rounds, because he had a phenomenal punch and he was strong and he was young and so on. And Muhammad Ali had gone past his prime. It's just like the Iranian civilization. It's 4,000 years old. It's all gone. Um, and what did Muhammad Ali do? He took the beating for 6 rounds, rope a dope, and by the 7th round, George Foreman's gallery was all burnt away. And Ali came out of the 7th round, and boom, it was over. And I see that metaphor of rope a dope that Muhammad Ali put into action and caught everybody by surprise is what is happening in Iran. Iran has done the rope a dope. And now it was supposed to be a weekend war. You decapitate the leadership of Iran, and Iran will surrender. And all the people will rise up and overthrow the regime. A complete arrogant view. No understanding. Trump has no understanding of Islam, no understanding of Shia Islam, nor anybody around him, nor any of the intellectuals in America who keep talking about this. Forget about Israelis and forget about Jews. It is the Americans. That Shia Islam is based upon the model of Imam Ali and Imam Hussein. They stood up for justice and fought against armies and took their death, martyrdom, shaheed, instead of walking away or surrendering. That's what Iran represents. That's the position of Iran. If they had understood that, they would have had respect for them. That was exactly, they learned nothing from the situation in Vietnam. Remember, in June of 2025, it was exactly 50 years after the last American helicopter took flight from the roof of the American embassy in Saigon with the American ambassador fleeing from Vietnam as Saigon fell to the Viet Congs. So when the war began, more than 15 years before that, the journalists over there in Vietnam, it was first the French and then the Americans, they asked Ho Chi Minh, how dare you? How do you imagine you're going to take on America? And Ho Chi Minh said, we're not taking on America. We are fighting for our liberty, for our independence. And Americans are going to kill a lot of Vietnamese. And we're going to kill a few. But at the end of the day, the Americans will put the tail between the legs and run away. That's exactly what happened.
Yes. I want to thank you. I don't. I have to cut it short. I got a phone call. I have to get my daughter's medicine. She had a seizure yesterday, and so
Okay.
yeah, I have to go get her medicine. And I want to thank everybody for joining me. I want to thank you. We got to get you back on soon, Professor. I'm not going to end it the way I normally end it. I want to just tell everybody thank you all. I gotta run. I gotta go pick it up before things close.
Yes.
Thank
Yes.
you all.
Your daughter is very important. Yeah.
Thank
Okay.
you. All right.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye. Shukran.